Berlin, the name alone conjures images of a vibrant modern capital, a hub of art, history, and innovation. But for nearly 3 decades, Berlin was a city torn in two, a powerful, physical manifestation of the global ideological struggle known as the Cold War. To understand the Berlin of today, we must first go back to a time when a single city was separated by a wall of concrete and barbed wire, dividing not just streets and neighborhoods, but families, friends, and the very future of a nation. The story of the Berlin Wall isn't just about a physical barrier. It's about the deep-seated political tensions that led to its creation. After the end of World War II in 1945, the victorious Allied powers, the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and the Soviet Union, divided Germany and its capital Berlin into 4 occupation zones. While the Allies had worked together to defeat the Nazis, their fundamental differences in ideologic capitalism versus communism quickly transformed them from partners into rivals. As the Cold War began to set in, the Western Allies consolidated their zones into what would become West Germany, and their sectors of Berlin into West Berlin. The Soviet Union, in turn, established East Germany, with East Berlin as its capital. This created a peculiar and highly volatile situation. West Berlin, democratic and capitalist island, was located deep within the territory of a communist state. For the first 16 years after the war, the border between East and West Berlin was relatively open. While checkpoints existed, people could move between the two sides for work, family visits, or cultural events. However, this porous border became a major problem for the East German government, DOC. Stark economic and political differences were impossible to ignore. West Berlin, fueled by Marshall Plan aid and a free market economy, flourished. East Berlin, under a Soviet-style communist system, lagged far behind. The result was a mass exodus. Between 1949 and 1961, nearly 3.5 million East Germans, many of them highly skilled professionals, fled to the west through Berlin. This brain drain was an economic and demographic catastrophe for East Germany. The Soviet Union and the East German government viewed this as an unbearable threat to their state's stability and survival. Something had to be done to stop the flow of people, and the solution they chose was swift and brutal. On the night of August 13, 1961, East German soldiers and workers began to seal off the border. They started with barbed wire fences, then moved to building a concrete wall. In a matter of days, the city was brutally split. The Berlin Wall became the most powerful symbol of the Cold War, a physical representation of the Iron Curtain that had descended across Europe. With the wall in place, life in Berlin was changed forever. The city was physically one, but politically, economically, and socially, it was now 2 separate worlds. The wall was a monument to division, but it was also a stage for human stories of resistance, tragedy, and the quiet dignity of everyday life. In West Berlin, life went on. The city, surrounded by East German territory, was a bastion of democracy and freedom. Its residents lived under the constant, unnerving reality of being a capitalist outpost in a communist world. Yet they also enjoyed the freedoms and opportunities of the West. West Berlin became a thriving cultural center, a magnet for artists, musicians, and young people looking for an alternative lifestyle. The presence of Allied forces, American, British, and French, provided a sense of security, even as the threat of an East German or Soviet takeover loomed large. Famous figures like David Bowie and Iggy Pop moved to West Berlin, drawn by its unique atmosphere and cultural freedom. It was a city of defiant optimism, a testament to the belief that the wall could not break the human spirit. Meanwhile, just a few meters away, East Berlin existed in a completely different reality. The East German government, officially known as the German Democratic Republic (GDR), controlled every aspect of life. The wall was referred to as the anti-fascist protection rampart, propaganda term used to justify its existence as a defense against Western aggression. In reality, it was a prison wall, designed to keep its own citizens from leaving. The city was under constant surveillance, with the notorious Stasi secret police monitoring the population for any signs of dissent. Despite these oppressive conditions, life in East Berlin was not without its own unique character. The government provided universal health care, education, and employment. The city was a center of socialist-style architecture and culture. However, the lack of consumer goods, political freedom, and personal choice created a deep sense of frustration. The most harrowing stories were those of families and friends separated by the wall, some of whom lived just meters apart but could no longer see or speak to each other. The wall became a stage for daring escape attempts, some of which were successful, but many of which ended in tragedy. The Death Strip, a no-man's land patrolled by armed guards and filled with booby traps, was a grim reminder of the wall's lethal purpose. The Berlin Wall, once a seemingly permanent fixture of the European landscape, proved to be more fragile than anyone could have imagined. The events that led to its collapse were not a single explosion, but a series of cracks that weakened the communist bloc from within. Throughout the 1980s, the Soviet Union, under the leadership of Mikhail Gorbachev, began to implement policies of glasnost openness and perestroika economic restructuring. These reforms signaled a shift away from hardline communist control and a greater tolerance for dissent in Eastern Bloc countries. As the Soviet grip loosened, pro-democracy movements began to sweep across Eastern Europe. In Poland, the Solidarity movement gained momentum. In Hungary, the government began to dismantle its border fence with Austria, creating an escape route for thousands of East Germans. Throughout the autumn of 1989, the pressure on the East German government was immense. Mass protests, known as the Monday demonstrations, were taking place in cities like Leipzig and Berlin, with citizens demanding political reforms, freedom of travel, and an end to the one-party rule. The protests were peaceful but powerful, a clear signal that the people had had enough. On November 9, 1989, a series of events led to the most unexpected moment in modern history. During a press conference, an East German government spokesperson, Günter Schabowski, mistakenly announced that new travel regulations would allow East Germans to travel to the West immediately. He had been instructed to say that the new rules would come into effect the following day, but his error was broadcast live on television. The news spread like wildfire. Thousands of East Berliners, in disbelief and overwhelming hope, gathered at the checkpoints. They demanded to be let through. The border guards, confused and without clear orders, were confronted by an unstoppable force of humanity. At the Bornholmer Strasse checkpoint, the commander, Harold Geiger, realized he could not hold back the crowd without a violent confrontation. He made a historic decision. He ordered the gates to be opened, and the moment the gates opened, a wave of jubilation swept across the city. East and West Berliners, strangers a moment before, rushed into each other's arms. They climbed atop the wall, dancing and celebrating. People began to tear down the concrete barrier with hammers and picks, in a collective act of liberation. The fall of the wall was just the beginning of a new chapter for Berlin. The city was now free, but the monumental task of reunification lay ahead. The physical barrier was gone, but the decades of ideological division had created deep cultural, social, and economic gaps between East and West. The first few years were a whirlwind of change. On October 3, 1990, just 11 months after the wall fell, Germany was officially reunified. Berlin, once again, became the capital of a united Germany. The city began a massive and complex process of integration. The two distinct economies, one capitalist and one socialist, had to be merged. East German industries, many of which were outdated and inefficient, collapsed, leading to high unemployment. The city faced the challenge of a crumbling infrastructure in the east and a flood of new residents, eager to experience the West. Culturally, the two sides had to learn to live together again. West Berliners were often seen as arrogant, while East Berliners were sometimes perceived as naive. The term Mauer im Kopf, or wall in the mind, was coined to describe the psychological barrier that remained long after the physical one had disappeared. However, the city's unique energy and creativity soon began to bridge these divides. Artists, entrepreneurs, and young people flocked to the newly accessible East, taking over abandoned buildings and turning them into studios, clubs, and galleries. Areas like Prenzlauer and Friedrichshain, once drab communist districts, became vibrant bohemian hubs. Today, Berlin stands as a living testament to its dramatic history. The scars of the wall are still visible, but they are now a part of the city's identity, not a source of division. Remnants of the wall have been preserved as memorials, like the East Side Gallery. a long stretch of the wall covered in powerful murals. The new and old have been integrated in a way that respects the past while embracing the future. The city has become a global leader in technology, with a thriving startup scene and a cultural capital renowned for its museums, music, and nightlife. The story of Berlin is a powerful lesson in resilience. The fall of the wall was a moment of liberation. But the reunification of the city both physically and psychologically has been a long, hard-fought journey. Berlin stands today as a powerful symbol of hope, a city that proves that even the deepest of divides can be overcome, and that a united future is always possible. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of Berlin's incredible journey. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories of cities and their transformations.